Have you ever lain awake at 3 in the morning, mattress engineered by NASA spin-off technology beneath you, climate control holding the room at an exact 68 degrees, blackout curtains blocking every photon of street light, and still stared at the ceiling wondering why sleep won't come? Now picture a settler in 1840s Ohio climbing into a rope bed stuffed with straw in a room where the fire has died to embers and the temperature is dropping toward 40, with 6 children breathing in the same small space and the wind whistling through chinks in the log walls. By every modern standard, that settler should have been miserable. Instead, historical diaries and letters reveal something unexpected. Those early settlers routinely reported sleeping deeply, waking refreshed, and rarely suffering from the insomnia that now torments roughly 1 in 3 adults in the industrialized world. Keep watching, because what we are going to reveal about sleep before electricity, before memory foam, and before the 8-hour rule will challenge everything you think you know about what your body actually needs after dark. The first thing that needs to be dismantled is the assumption that early settlers slept the way we try to sleep, which is to say, in one unbroken 8-hour block from roughly 10 at night until 6 in the morning. They didn't. The consolidated 8-hour sleep is a product of the industrial age, of factory whistles and shift schedules and electric light that pushed bedtime later while alarm clocks nailed wake time to the wall. Before that standardization, human beings across the Western world slept in a pattern that researchers now call biphasic sleep. 2 distinct blocks of slumber separated by a period of wakefulness lasting 1 to 2 hours in the middle of the night. This was not a regional quirk or a frontier adaptation. It was the default human sleep architecture, documented in medical texts, personal diaries, court records, and literature from Homer to Chaucer to the Pennsylvania Gazette. The pattern was simple and universal. First, sleep began roughly 2 hours after dusk, when the light failed and the evening chores were finished. A farming family might go down between 8 and 9 o'clock, the house settling into darkness except for the faint glow of banked coals in the hearth. They slept deeply for 3 to 4 hours, riding the first wave of slow-wave, restorative sleep that the human brain naturally produces early in the night. Then, somewhere between midnight and 1 in the morning, they woke up. Not briefly, not to roll over and check the time. They woke fully, for an hour or more, and they did so without anxiety because nobody had told them that waking in the night was a disorder. They called it the watch, and they treated it as a normal, useful, even pleasant part of the daily cycle. What people did during the watch varied by circumstance and disposition, but historical sources paint a remarkably consistent picture. Some lay quietly and prayed or meditated. Some talked softly with their spouse, the only private conversation a married couple might get in a house full of children. Some rose and tended the fire, adding a log against the deepening cold. A surprising number wrote in journals or read by candlelight. Benjamin Franklin famously used his waking interval to take cold air baths, sitting naked in his chamber while he read. A practice that sounds eccentric until you consider the era's understanding of health and the absence of central heating. The point was not productivity. The watch was a liminal space, a quiet interval between 2 sleeps that belonged entirely to the sleeper. The anxiety that a modern insomniac feels at 2 a.m., the panicked calculation of how few hours remain before the alarm, was almost entirely absent. The second sleep followed naturally after the watch ended, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning, and lasted until dawn. The total sleep duration across both phases generally ranged from 7 to 9 hours, which aligns precisely with what modern sleep scientists recommend. But the distribution was different, and that distribution may have been physiologically superior. The waking interval naturally separates the 2 major phases of sleep architecture. The first block is dominated by deep, slow-wave sleep, the physically restorative phase during which tissue repair, hormone release, and immune function peak. The second block contains the bulk of REM sleep, the phase associated with memory consolidation, emotional processing, and creative problem-solving. A consolidated 8-hour block throws these phases into a single, continuous sequence, while the biphasic pattern, still observed in cultures without electric light from the Chimane people of Bolivia to the Hadza of Tanzania, allows the brain to reset between the 2 major phases. The watch may not be a glitch in human sleep design. It may be a feature. The settlers' sleep quality wasn't just a matter of timing. It was profoundly influenced by the physical environment of the pre-industrial home, which, despite its lack of modern comfort, provided sensory conditions that are extremely difficult to replicate in a 21st century bedroom. Consider light exposure. A farming family rose with the sun and spent the majority of their waking hours outdoors or in spaces illuminated by natural daylight. Their eyes received full-spectrum solar radiation at intensities that routinely exceeded 10,000 lux, the threshold at which the brain's suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock, receives a powerful synchronizing signal. At night, the only artificial light came from candles, oil lamps, or the hearth, all of which emit a warm, dim spectrum almost entirely in the red and yellow wavelengths below 2000 Kelvin. Blue light, the short wavelength radiation that suppresses melatonin production and delays sleep onset, was effectively non-existent after dark. The transition from bright, natural light to dim, warm light to total darkness was gradual, physiological, and matched to the arc of the sun. The settler's brain was bathed in a hormonal signal that said sleep with a clarity that no modern urban dweller ever experiences. Temperature was another factor. Early settler homes were not heated evenly. The hearth or stove warmed the main room, but bedrooms upstairs or in the rear of the house cooled significantly overnight. A typical bedroom in a New England farmhouse in January might drop into the 40s or even the 30s by morning. Far from being a hardship, this was a powerful sleep aid. Human core temperature must drop by approximately 2 degrees Fahrenheit to initiate and maintain deep sleep. This is a biological requirement, not a preference. The body's thermoregulatory set point descends at nightfall, and falling asleep in a cool environment accelerates the onset of slow-wave sleep. Modern sleep laboratories consistently recommend bedroom temperatures between 60 and 67 degrees, with some researchers pushing as low as 55 for optimal sleep quality. The settler who climbed under a heavy feather tick in a 40-degree room was unknowingly giving himself the perfect thermal gradient for deep, uninterrupted rest. The heavy bedding, wool blankets, feather mattresses, quilts, created a microclimate of warmth around the body while the face breathed cold air, exactly the configuration that sleep physiologists now identify as ideal. The mattress itself is worth examining because it challenges every assumption about comfort that the bedding industry has spent a century instilling. The settler's bed was not soft. The base was often a woven rope frame, tightened periodically with a wooden key to prevent sagging. On top of the ropes went a straw tick, essentially a large cloth sack filled with fresh straw or dried corn husks, which provided cushioning but also something more important: ventilation. Straw allows air to circulate beneath the sleeper, wicking moisture away and preventing the buildup of heat and humidity that modern memory foam traps directly against the body. The straw tick was replaced or refreshed annually, usually after harvest when dry stalks were abundant. On top of the straw went a feather bed or several wool blankets, and the combination created a sleep surface that was supportive without being rigid, yielding without enveloping. There is growing evidence that excessively soft mattresses contribute to spinal misalignment and restless sleep by allowing the body to sink into postures that restrict breathing and compress joints. The settler's firmer bed, combined with the fact that most settlers slept on their sides or backs rather than stomachs, a posture encouraged by the firmness, may have reduced apnea events and improved airway function. Noise is the variable where modern intuition fails most completely. We assume the frontier was silent, and it was not. It was, however, quiet in a specific acoustic sense. The sounds that filled a settler's night were largely non-threatening and acoustically consistent. The crackle of cooling timbers, the rustle of wind in the chimney, the distant call of an owl, the breathing of children and animals in the dark. These are steady-state or rhythmically predictable sounds. The human auditory system, evolved over millions of years in natural environments, treats predictable background noise as an acoustic null. It habituates rapidly and ceases to register consciously. What the brain cannot habituate to is intermittent, unpredictable noise with sudden onset. The slamming of a car door, the electronic chirp of a notification, the cycling of a refrigerator compressor, the bass thump of a neighbor's music. These sounds trigger micro-arousals, brief, partial awakenings that fragment sleep architecture without the sleeper ever becoming consciously aware of waking. A 2015 study in the Journal of Sleep Research found that even when subjects reported sleeping through recorded traffic noise, their EEG traces showed spikes of alpha and beta wave activity consistent with arousal events. The settler, sleeping in a world without motors, speakers, or alert tones, experienced far fewer of these events. His sleep was less fragmented, his slow wave phases deeper and more continuous. The social dimension of settler sleep probably mattered as much as the physical environment. The modern bedroom is private, isolated, a sanctuary for one or two people. The settler bedroom was communal. Children shared beds with siblings, infants slept with parents. Extended family or hired hands might bunk in the same room or in a loft directly overhead. To a modern sensibility, this sounds chaotic. From a sleep architecture perspective, it may have been the opposite. Co-sleeping, particularly in the form of a shared sleeping space, provides what anthropologists call social thermoregulation and what psychologists call co-regulation. The presence of other sleeping humans, particularly family members with predictable breathing patterns and familiar scents, signals safety to the brain's vigilance centers. Cortisol levels drop. Heart rate variability shifts toward parasympathetic dominance. The body enters a state of calm that facilitates deeper sleep. Research on traditional societies that still practice communal sleeping consistently finds lower rates of sleep-onset insomnia and lower subjective reports of nighttime anxiety compared to societies where solitary sleep is the norm. The settler child who woke during the watch didn't face the dark alone. She heard her parents murmuring below, her brother snoring beside her, the entire household breathing in the same cold air. That is a profoundly reassuring soundscape, and it produced sleep that was socially buffered against fear. The diet of early settlers contributed to sleep quality in ways that are only now being understood. Their food was heavy in complex carbohydrates and relatively low in refined sugar. A standard farm supper might be cornmeal mush or brown bread with butter, root vegetables, perhaps salt pork, and milk or small beer. The glycemic load was moderate and sustained. Blood sugar rose and fell gradually through the night rather than spiking and crashing as it does after a modern high-sugar dessert or processed snack. Hypoglycemic events during sleep are a major cause of nighttime awakenings, triggering cortisol release that pulls the brain out of deep sleep. The settler's evening meal, the last food consumed before the long fast until morning, provided slow-release energy that supported stable blood glucose across both phases of biphasic sleep. Alcohol consumption followed a different pattern as well. Settlers drank, and they often drank daily in the form of small beer, hard cider, or whiskey. But the timing and quantity were not the pattern of modern evening drinking. A mug of small beer with supper had an alcohol content of 1 to 2%, roughly the strength of modern kombucha, and was consumed with food early in the evening. Hard spirits were taken in small quantities, often in the afternoon or early evening, not as a nightcap immediately before bed. The modern habit of 2 or 3 drinks at 10 o'clock, bringing a significant blood alcohol concentration into the first hours of sleep, would have been economically and practically impossible for most settlers. Alcohol is a notorious sleep disruptor. It accelerates sleep onset, but fragments the second half of the night, suppressing REM sleep and triggering rebound arousal when the liver finishes metabolizing the ethanol. The settler's drinking pattern, whatever its other health implications, largely avoided this nocturnal disruption. Physical exhaustion, the most obvious variable, was also the most powerful. The settler's day involved continuous physical labor from dawn to dusk, chopping wood, hauling water, plowing, planting, harvesting, milking, churning, spinning, weaving, cooking, cleaning. The caloric expenditure of a frontier farmer was roughly 3,000 to 4,000 calories per day for men and 2,000 to 3,000 for women. This level of sustained physical activity builds what sleep scientists call sleep pressure, the accumulation of adenosine in the brain that drives the homeostatic sleep urge. The deeper the daytime sleep pressure, the faster sleep onset occurs, and the more slow-wave sleep the brain generates during the first phase of the night. Modern sedentary lifestyles produce far lower adenosine accumulation, which is one reason that even physically comfortable modern humans often cannot fall asleep quickly or sleep as deeply as their ancestors. The settler's sleep was not a luxury. It was a biological necessity driven by a level of daily exertion that most of us will never approach. The final and most surprising element of settler sleep hygiene was the almost complete absence of anxiety about sleep itself. This is the cruel paradox of modern insomnia. The fear of not sleeping becomes the cause of not sleeping. Once a person begins lying in bed, calculating the hours until morning, catastrophizing the next day's fatigue, and checking the clock to confirm the worst, the sympathetic nervous system activates and sleep becomes physiologically impossible. The settler lacked the concept of insomnia as a medical pathology. He lacked a clock in the bedroom. He lacked the cultural pressure to achieve an uninterrupted 8-hour block. When he woke during the watch, he did not think something was wrong with him. He thought it was time to stoke the fire, to murmur a prayer, to check on the children. The absence of performance anxiety around sleep removed the single greatest obstacle to falling asleep. Sleep came because it was not chased. The historical evidence for the quality of pre-industrial sleep is not just anecdotal. The historian Roger Ekirch's landmark study, At Day's Close, Night in Times Past, published in 2005, unearthed more than 500 references to biphasic sleep in sources spanning the medieval period through the early 19th century. Medical texts prescribed the interval between first and second sleep as the ideal time for conception, for digestion, and for intellectual labor. French physician Laurent Joubert wrote in 1578 that the watch was the time when the brain is at its best and the humors are settled. English broadsides offered prayers specifically for the time between sleeps. References to first sleep and second sleep appear in Don Quixote, in the novels of Charles Dickens, and in the letters of Virginia colonists. The pattern was not an oddity of the frontier. It was the baseline human experience before electric light and industrial timekeeping rewired it. It is worth noting what the settlers did not have. They did not have alarm clocks. The natural dawn, filtered through east-facing windows or an uncurtained wall, provided a graded light signal that triggered a cascade of cortisol and body temperature changes, bringing the sleeper gently through lighter sleep stages into full wakefulness. They did not have caffeine in the quantities we consume it. Coffee and tea existed and were drunk, but they were expensive imports reserved for special occasions, not the 3-mug morning ritual that now saturates the average adult with a half-life of 6 hours and fragments the next night's sleep before the current day is even finished. They did not have screens, blue-spectrum LEDs, scrolling content designed to hijack attention, or a 24-hour news cycle. They did not live in a culture that treated sleep as an inconvenience to be minimized. They treated it as a necessity to be respected, and their bodies returned the favor. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from, and what's the strangest thing that's ever helped you fall asleep? Hit that subscribe button for one forgotten frontier practice every week. And hit the like button if you've ever woken up at 2 a.m. and wondered if maybe your ancestors were onto something. Because the watch isn't broken. It's just been forgotten.